Tropical storm is and where it's headed, and we're going to come back home and talk about what's happening county by county, at least as far as some of the critical counties, as now the high tide moves through the afternoon and impacts different areas of northeast Florida and southeastern Georgia. All the while, the weather and concern lifts northward, and we'll talk about what's going to happen for you folks additionally in Nassau, Camden, and Glenn counties. Okay, so here is, again, the cone, as Michaela mentioned, will be updated at 5 o'clock. We don't see any reason for a major shift in the cone other than to say, and this shows it, that over the last 3 hours now, although the forecast was for more of this motion, there's been a jog a little more east than north. And I'm not saying that's going to continue, but at this point, the tropical storm forecast to become barely a hurricane, but significant, Category 1. Any slight jog east will take. And again, there's been more of a jog east versus north. So at the very least, that supports the idea that Ian, if it in fact becomes a hurricane at 8 o'clock tonight, that will be at least 90 miles offshore, and wouldn't be surprised if maybe we can say 100. Again, if you're new to hurricane country, that might not sound like much, but miles matter, believe me. Meanwhile, you're looking at one of the counties, St. Johns County in particular, where now we've passed high tide, and although, again, that's a lot of water, notice it's a good visual there. See that vehicle going through it? I mean, we can see most of the wheels. So it's not like that water even there, feet deep. There's someone kayaking, so it's not like it's a terribly stormy situation. And I can tell you that looking at the seawall, it's good to see. So again, no doubt about it, it's a flood. We know there's water into businesses, up to people's homes, but that's a good sign to see. Nice to have the eyeballs. Okay, so let's go back to the tropical storm. And again, it's not going to, at least we don't think, it won't start jogging back northwestward until it gets into or toward the Carolinas. That's significant for you folks in Georgia and even Nassau County. I know you're watching that closely. We will as well, but it still looks like it's going to more parallel your coast and not inch back towards you until it gets to about Savannah and then heads up toward Charleston, South Carolina. So let's take a look at the updates. And we're going to continue to tweak these. And I think if we've done a decent job forecasting, we shouldn't see big changes in these anymore. But I know inches matter, and so we're going to talk about that. So the risk of flooding will continue to be highest. St. Augustine is the most dramatic example of that. If you've been watching us with Jessica and with Jack, with Zach, and with Lou, that literally within a 30-minute period, we've gone from nearly knee-deep to not even ankle-deep in some locations. And we'll see that up and down along the coast. So the next water level rise, and again, we say water level rise because that's the combination of rain and tides. That's going to be significant. That's going to be overnight tonight. We don't think it's going to be now any worse than what we're experiencing right now. So that's some good news. Might it be a little bit better? It might. But at least let's stick with the idea it's not going to be any worse. And we're highlighting downtown because the downtown water level really represents where so many people live and businesses are up and down the St. Johns River in Duval County. And we're talking about creeks all the way up by the airport, through the north side, down to the south side, and to the west side. So that's why, in addition to sort of this average 4 foot above, I'm hyper-focused there on downtown because that number can impact so many people, whether we're talking about Riverside, San Marco, and then up and down the St. Johns River. However, even though that's good news, and most of this is happening because Ian is both heading farther and farther offshore and moving quickly, but we're still going to stay windy. Occasional gusts to 65 miles per hour. Any kind of gust near 60 is when we are and have seen those limbs come down and occasionally some older trees. So let's talk about St. Johns and Flagler, where you've had the highest wind gust, the heaviest of the rains, and the highest water level rise. Here's some good news. Yes, you're going to have some more rain, but only another 1 to 3 inches. And I think most of that will end before the next high tide. The water level rise, we feel very confident about this now. The water level rise will not be higher with tonight's and early morning's high tide. I would love to say you're not going to have a problem at all. I can't say that. But at least it's not going to be higher, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a couple inches lower than what you experienced. Still going to stay gusty. Can't rule out for about another couple of hours. Might even see some gusts to about 70 miles per hour. Now we're going to go up the coast. We've talked about Duval, at least as best I can right now, with that hyper 3.5 downtown overnight tonight. But let's go up the coast now. We've already seen flooding in the St. Mary's area, and that's significant because although the St. Mary's does flow from inland, it's very sensitive to the tides. And so the tidal levels came up about almost 3 to 4 feet. I don't think in St. Mary's and elsewhere in Nassau, I'm talking all the way up to all those estuaries and even for downtown Brunswick and the marina area there, I don't think it's going to be any higher for you than what you've experienced with this high tide. So even though it's going to take longer for conditions to improve up there, by the next high tide, even for you, winds should be northwesterly. We'll keep a close watch on that. Yes, you as well will be gusty, occasionally up to about 65 miles per hour. Incidentally, for those of you that might just now be joining us and you see what looks like a sinking boat, we know the person is off of that. We also know that that station wagon or whatever that is has been sitting there for a while. We know the person is out of there. So you're seeing damage, but at least we're not concerned about humans there. Just want to let you know in case you're just joining us. All right, so let's go now to Clay and Putnam County. In fact, there's another good sign. See those folks walking on the seawall? And again, I know I've said this before, but for those of you just joining, this is a dramatic picture, but the fact that they're actually walking on the seawall and we can see a foot of the seawall, I find that to be good news, a sign that it's not going to be worse. In other words, that showed the seawall is about 4 feet, about. And so now the fact that it's below the seawall, that shows me the water level is down to about 3 feet. So this is all relative news. Okay. Clay and Putnam County, because the high tide is still working down the St. Johns River. Now, for those of you new to the area, Clay County in Clay County in particular have two different scenarios going. The St. Johns River, totally tidal. So it totally depends on what's happening with high tide. Whereas Black Creek, both the south and the north, that's inland, not really tidal. I mean, the Black Creek does flow into the St. Johns, so it's somewhat tidal there. But the real concern for homes flooding on the Black Creek are up here, where typically Black Creek is only about 2 to 4 feet deep. But it can get up, we've seen it 25, 28, 30 feet. A couple of our anchors have been in there over the last several years and over the decades. It's an amazing dramatic change that had to occur. And the good news there, and I'm mentioning it here, is the Black Creek crest is expected to be just moderate and maybe not even moderate. Now, to understand, of course, any flood is bad, right? But just so you know, over the years, nearly all of the homes have been built up enough to where it takes what technically is called a major flood. And we're now it's now looking like it's highly unlikely that there's going to be a major flood in the Black Creek. We're going to keep a close watch on that. But one of the additional reasons is because I don't see the Black Creek watershed, is what we call it, getting any more than an inch of rain at the most. So good news there. Winds are going to continue gusty. A lot of trees in beautiful Clay and Putnam County, so still be careful. If you don't have to drive around, I wouldn't. Yeah, I'll just leave it with that, because gust of 60 can bring down a limb, can bring down an old tree, and gosh, we just not want to see a tragedy unless you just have to be out and about this afternoon. Now, for those again new to the area, or this whole title thing kind of gets confusing, notice that along the coastal areas, Jacksonville Beach, St. Mary's, Brunswick, and St. Augustine for that matter, these times are all very similar because you're so close actually to the ocean. These times that vary, they vary because they're tides connected to the St. Johns River. So these tides then become later. Here's the Buckman. So here's the Orange Park, Mandarin area down toward Doctor's Inlet. So the water, it's not going to be a dramatic rise, but inch by inch, it's still going to rise a little bit more down to the Buckman. Shands Bridge, that gets us down to Green Cove Springs. Then across the river, think East Palatka, and then so on. So that's why you see a variation. You folks who live there know that. I just want to let the rest of you know that it's not like this sudden huge surge is working down the river, but you won't see that tide start dropping down around Orange Park and Mandarin until after 425, and down around the Shands Bridge until after 725. Let me go to the winds quickly here. So these are sustained winds. Sustained meaning lasting at least a minute. And although certainly windy, even them have come down a little bit now. The highest, obviously, right on the coast and the river. So what's happening here? Is it just the water? Well, kind of. The winds that we feel where we are, us humans, on the ground, it's dependent upon whether or not there's an inversion. And what I mean by that is, the warmer it is on the ground, the higher the winds will be, because it's always windier above us. So the warmer it is on the ground, the more of that wind, we say mix, but the more of that wind can get down to the surface. And that's why, so it's not just the lack of friction. It's because right along the river, temperatures are warmer, and so that wind can mix down to where we are. That's another way of saying another reason why that dry air that we've gotten into the area that was drawn into Ian was such good news. We don't always have time to talk about all the whys of this. But not only does the dry air shut off the rainfall, and we've seen that, not only does the dry air cause evaporative cooling, and so it weakens this heat engine, Ian, we've seen that, but then when you have an inversion, when you have the dry air and it causes the evaporative cooling, it creates that inversion. So notice what the winds are like away from where the warm water is. So it's not just that I promise you, planes that are flying right now at 5,000 to 10,000 feet above Keystone, above Gainesville, above Lake City, above Waycross, above Brunswick, even at look at St. Simon's Island. If you're at 5,000 to 10,000 feet, winds there are blowing at 60 to 80 miles per hour. But because the cool air has gotten down, which was because of the dry air, there's an inversion, and so it's almost like a ceiling. That wind can't work down to the region. Okay, I could go on and on, but I know there's other things to cover here. Okay, so what about the wind gust? Notice the wind gust, still powerful. Remember, once you get up to about 60, we can still see some limbs and trees come down, but even out around the coastline now, we're beginning to see that drop, and that's happening for two reasons. Number one, we're seeing the tropical storm nudge a little more to the east, but number two, back to that inversion. So not only, in fact, notice the winds. They're now north and north-northwest. That is where they're coming from. So not only are they not coming off the ocean and therefore not pushing the ocean in, they're not coming off the 80-degree ocean. They're now starting to come off the drier air, the cooler air, so that inversion is even getting out toward the beaches. So even so I promise you, whereas St. Augustine was getting some gusts near 70 miles per hour just an hour or two ago, one of the reasons why those winds have dropped is because ever so slight, if you can think of a compass, about every hour, just a couple degrees on the compass, but we call it backing. And every time it backs, not only does it then help us with lack of water pushing in, it also allows that inversion to come on in. And even just a degree or two will help with the wind. So here's a visual presentation of what I'm trying to talk about. So here is Ian. And why is this happening? Well, this is that front that we were talking about. Notice how this is an attempt to show the wind speed, but I took the numbers out there, and these are where the highest winds are, because you have the warm air then hits the front, and some of that warm air rises over it, and then the high pressure with the northeast winds. Sometimes you'll hear me or hear us talk about the pinch. Does that make sense? You sort of have a pinch here, and that's why the highest winds have been St. Augustine, Daytona, then Palm Coast, and then St. Johns County. Okay, I'm about ready to wrap it up here so we can see what's happening with people, but I just wanted to reinforce some of the things that are happening. Radar shows that. Can you see it ever so slowly here? We'll zoom in a little bit. Yeah, there it is. Ever so slowly, we see the rain coming to an end from west to east. Still a lot out there and gusty winds, and that's why we're going to stay with you through the afternoon and the evening.
Are doing such a great job explaining all those complex things. And thank you to everybody on my Facebook page. You can go on there right now. I'm asking you, what's it like at your house? Jeanette says, west side of Placa, doing well, still have power. I like that. Martha in Arlington, wind crazy, blew her backyard fence down. Georgia, Keystone Heights, very good, very thankful. And then Lisa said, not much of my house on the north side, some wind, but nothing to worry about. So I think there's a lot of gratitude around areas of Jacksonville. So.